Hi, this is Bharti and we are here at GitLab Contribute in New Orleans, and today we have with us Sid Sijbrandij. You are CEO and co-founder of GitLab. So first of all, thanks for being here.
Yeah, thanks for this interview.
When I was watching your keynote, and I have been reading about it, there are so many things I'm fascinated with. Not only that you created GitLab, but also when you're talking about cutting emissions, by remote working, and these are the things people don't talk about, because you are actually touching on climate change, which is one of the biggest problems. So I want to talk about so many different things, but first what I want to start with is, when you met Dimitri, you shared a story. What did you see in GitLab that you wanted to get involved with the project and wanted to build a company around it?
Yeah, at the time I was a Ruby on Rails developer, and all the tools that I used, every single tool that I used was open source. Everyone could use it. And the collaboration software was the only tool I used that was proprietary. And here was this new project where the collaboration tool was now shared as well. And I thought, well, if open source makes sense for anything, it's a tool you use to collaborate. That should be open to collaboration. So I thought this might have a really bright future.
But you also see a potential for building a company around it, and then you choose a totally unique model. So when was it that you saw that there is a potential to build, there will be, building a company means there will be users also, paying users?
Yeah. Well, at the time, I was wrong, but at the time I thought everyone is using GitLab by downloading and running it themselves, but that's an administrative burden. The future seems to be software as a service. Salesforce is doing really well. They're popularizing that model. So for GitLab, the offering should probably be GitLab.com, software as a service. So I saw that missing in kind of the GitLab lineup. So I thought that is something I can contribute. Now, I turned out to be wrong. Although GitLab.com is really important to us, the majority of our revenue is still coming from people self-hosting. So that has become a very important part of the way we distribute GitLab. But at the same time, we also have the .com service. So we're agnostic now about what it is. But although I was wrong about .com, I was right about GitLab. There were many, many big organizations already running GitLab without any form of support. So that groundswell of activity was there. So it turned out okay.
Yeah, I mean, it always happens. Some decisions are right, some are wrong. But how do you learn from your mistakes, and, because you also said, move fast, even if there are mistakes, if one step at a time, you can always go back and fix it. So in the evolution of GitLab, are there any milestones where you realize, hey, you know what, you gave one example, any milestone where you learned from the mistakes and made it even better?
Yeah, I think one thing that another big lesson we learned, two other big lessons we learned. One was a Y Combinator. And we were 2 weeks into the program, and everyone else had made so much more progress than we. And we were working with these 3-month plans that we were trying to realize. That was the length of Y Combinator. And other people were just achieving a lot in just 2 weeks. So we went back, and we were all living in the same house together at the time. And we said, look, we got to up our pace, not by working longer hours, but let's try to get to 80% of the result with 20% of the work. Let's try to see what we can ship in 2 weeks. So that's when we found out iteration. And the nice thing about iteration is that if you take a small step, if you're a bit wrong, if you're a bit off, it doesn't matter that much. You can correct later. You will get, after you ship something, you get feedback, you can correct then. So you don't have to coordinate or worry that much up front. So it's not so much that we make less mistakes, but we try to make them smaller. Another pivotal moment was when we combined GitLab version control and GitLab CI into a single application. It was advocated for by Camille, who recently joined the company after contributing to GitLab. And he said, it's going to be way better for the end user. And Dimitri and I didn't believe him, but he also said it's going to be easier to ship it as one application. We said, okay, that makes sense. So we did it, and it turns out he was totally right. It is much better as a single application. So that was another pivotal moment where Dimitri and I were very much wrong, but we learned from that. And we recently introduced a new sub-value, and that is customer results. So we should always look at what we can achieve for the customer. That doesn't mean you always do what the customer asks, but we should be very close to what can we help them achieve, what big problem or opportunity can we unlock for them.
Right. And as you just gave this example, a disagreement between. So you see yourself as a businessman or a technologist, because when there will be disagreement, somebody has to make the call, and so which is your strength?
I think of myself as a product CEO. So I like the product a lot, but we have a lot of great product people. So first and foremost, I'm the business person, the CEO. So my task is to articulate a strategy that is correct and that everyone knows and executes on, to make sure there's a great team in place, and to make sure we have enough cash in the bank.
Right. Now let's. I want to go back a bit. In your past, before GitLab, were you fascinated with computers from the very early on, or when did and you said you were using a lot of open source. So what was the first time you came across an open source project? You're like, hey, this is really cool. That people are just sharing their code.
Yeah, I think one of the first things that happened was in '98. I was a student at a university, and I saw someone posting for an infrared receiver. And that infrared receiver allowed you to skip to the next MP3 song. And at that time, the only way to play MP3s was on your computer. It would use like all of your CPU power. And people hooked the computer up to the stereo, so did I. But it was annoying to have to walk to the computer to skip to the next song. And with this infrared receiver, you could just train a remote to do it. And I found that very interesting. And then I went to a linked page. It was a GeoCities page. And it had all the schematics for that infrared receiver. But it also had a big notice. I'm not selling any of these. And I was like, that's interesting. First of all, he's selling them on the student marketplace to me. So apparently he is selling, so there's a disconnect there. But even more interesting, he took the time to put that notice on that webpage, which means there's demand. People asked him for this. It got so annoying, he put that notice up, I'm not selling. So that became my first business. We partnered, and it's kind of like GitLab, where there was an open source inventor that already had made something incredible. People were knocking at the door, and I helped commercializing it.
Okay, we talked about technology part, we talked about business part. The most important thing that I see with GitLab is the culture that you have built, remote working. So when did you decide? You said, that it came out of necessity, but when did you decide that this is the path we should choose to build a company?
It happened over time. When we raised our B round, the investors were not convinced of remote. So the deal was, let's not get religious about this. As in, let's not assume that we're right. Let's keep an open mind and see if it works. And the idea was that it would, as we grew bigger and bigger, it would not work as well. That the extra overhead of remote would mean that we wouldn't be able to coordinate the big changes as we grew and as we got bigger and added more management layers. And there weren't a lot of examples out at the time. So we said, okay, let's see. And then as we scaled, we didn't have like attacks because of being remote. We actually did better because of being remote, because we wrote down our processes, because we wrote down our onboarding, because we wrote down our values. Things didn't get diluted. If you're co-located and you grow, you double every year, the message dilutes from the original people to the first generation, to the second generation, to the fourth, to the sixth, to the seventh generation that joins. And the message dilutes. If you write it down, the message gets better because you get to add more context. You get to improve it. Every time a question is asked that isn't documented, you add to it. So instead of getting worse, we got better. And so at a certain point, when we're a few hundred people, we said, okay, this is working so well. This is what we're going to do. It's not one of our values to be remote, but I think it's an outcome of our values.
You mentioned a couple of things. One was, let's just talk about society in general. When I look at it, the first industrial revolution, that kind of broke our families. People had to go to factories to work. It changed our culture altogether. We were like, but now with the fourth industrial revolution, with the VR and AR, where you can be where you want to be, and now the culture that you're promoting is also kind of changing. So when you look at GitLab, do you also envision the impact you might have on our planet itself? Because you also talk about cutting emissions, because you're not traveling, you're not building buildings, you're not wasting on air conditioning. So is it just a byproduct of what you're doing, or you consciously think that, hey, this is also something we should contribute?
Yeah, I think all remote is going to be a big revolution. Now, I'm not sure about the air conditioning use, because maybe people keep the air conditioning in their house on, and maybe that's less efficient than in an office where you share it. So I'm not sure about that. I'm pretty sure about the commute. You save the commute. Commutes are shorter. Even people at GitLab that have an office have it closer by. I do think that as we get to more knowledge work, it's more important that people are like a manager of one, that they manage their own time and their own activities. You don't need to kind of punch in, punch out. You don't need a person to tell you what to do. You get to very highly educated individuals. And I think by giving them this freedom to work when and where they want, you make their lives a bit better. And I think that's going to be something that every single employer will have to offer people. And another thing I really like about it is that you're forced to judge people or to assess job performance based on the output of people, not on how many hours they put in. And that's a really easy trap to fall into, where you say, oh, this person was in the parking lot the soonest, they leave the latest, apparently they're working the hardest. And I think that's very dysfunctional, because now people can only compete on how much time from their private life they put into work. If you allow people to compete based on the results they achieve, you're going to get more results. You're going to get what you measure. So measure results, don't measure input. And I think that 5G, VR, AR, they make this possible. GitLab would not be remote if it wasn't for fast internet connections and Zoom and Slack and GitLab issues and pages and all those other technologies.
When people get to spend more time with their family, they're also happy people, which also means happy employees, which also means better products for you.
People tend to stick around longer, for sure. So that really helps. At GitLab, our turnover is a lot lower than industry averages. And people are a fan of the company. You've been here at Contribute. People tend to be more positive about their work. And the focus on results, it's not that we make it easy for people to achieve their targets. This is a for-profit company. We're all working very, very diligently to achieve results. And you'll find people that at GitLab are short-term critical of themselves. They're short-term pessimists, long-term optimists. We always say, what is wrong? What can we improve? But we believe very much that long-term we're going to do great. But I think there's this, if you make what you can differentiate yourself, how you can get recognition in the company, if you change that from hours to results, there's a very positive change. And some people get a lot of results with fewer hours. They have more time for their family. And apart from fewer hours, it's also more flexibility. It's like when my kid is sick, or when I want to work from another country, or when I have to visit my parents or want to visit my parents. I want that flexibility to do that and to make those decisions. And I think the flexibility might be almost as important as the extra time that you gain by not commuting.
Yeah, it's not like work versus my life. Yeah. Like work and life, it's just both part of it, and we just do when we want to do it. So it's a very good, because when I look at it, I sometimes feel suffocated, that you have to go somewhere to work for those hours, and then you have to come back to your life. But here you're like, you can just work when you want, all we care about results. So that's excellent approach towards, work culture. Yeah. And I think that should be the ideal,
Yeah, we used to talk about work-life balance. Now we try to talk about work-life harmony. How do you get to do both? And there's risks, like people are at risk of working too long. So that's something everyone has to manage, and managers at GitLab, the only time they'll bring up how long are you working is when they suspect you're working too long hours, and they have to help you reduce that.
Oh, that's interesting that you actually monitor that you are working too much.
We don't monitor that, but if the manager suspects that's the only thing they can never say you work too few hours.
Yes.
It should always be about the results, but they can't say, hey, I suspect you're working too long. Let's talk to how your work week looks.
And it also means that you can hire the best brains from around the world, whether it's from Antarctica, I don't know if there's anybody but from African continent or from Asia or Australia, wherever it is. So
Unfortunately, not Antarctica yet.
Exactly.
The Wi-Fi is not that great, I heard. But yeah, we have people from over 50 countries. So the vast majority of the people on Earth, if they want to work for GitLab, they can. And that's really cool. It's really cool. Like yesterday, I was talking from someone in New Zealand, and she said, look, the only grid I'm on is the internet. Everything else, she was totally off the grid, but she was able to work for GitLab. I think that's really cool.
Yeah, but we had Ariel. She's a scientist, from NASA. She was in Antarctica. So if somebody sends a patch from there, then you can register that somebody is from Antarctica as well.
For sure.
You're right. So, but it also has its own challenges. You have to be culturally very, very sensitive, because a lot of things, people may take granted in one culture may be seen offensive or discouraging. So, as you build the company, how did you yourself became sensitive or empathetic towards those things, so that you can further percolate that culture within in the company itself?
Yeah, I think as a European, I had to learn, for example, to not bring politics and religion to work. That's much more common in the Netherlands, and we have to kind of train, especially European people who join us, that look, this is a much more diverse company, and those topics are divisive, and you shouldn't bring them to the workplace. Also, in North America, people are better able to kind of read between the lines, say something, and then people see between the lines for the message. So we need people from North America to kind of be more explicit, and we frequently need people from the rest of the world to dial it down a bit, to kind of meet in the middle there.
Yeah. You said in the keynote that you have solved the distance problem, but time zone problem is still there. Do you have a solution ready, because you have solved so many problems and you're still working on it?
Yeah, we're not going to solve the time zone problem. It's super hard. But one thing that's stung and that I'm trying to solve now is that we have a group conversation every day. So every workday at 8 a.m., one kind of department in GitLab has a slide deck of like, this is everything we worked on. And we spend 25 minutes of just people asking questions. There's a Google Doc, people ask questions. There's no presentation. They can record it ahead if they want, but it's just talking. And the APEC people said, hey, can we give a presentation not at that time slot, because it's very inconvenient for us. And I wanted to say yes, but at GitLab, we also try to make sure the new thing works before you throw away your old shoes. So we're going to try to do that, be more flexible in the timing of group conversations, and not have this 8 o'clock Pacific, which is obviously not accommodating the entire world, but spread it around more so that everyone has a chance to contribute.
So you already have a date, which is, once again, it's unique about that you want to go public on that particular date. Going public has a lot of risk involved. You lose some control because you are accountable to the shareholders. So do you think that is the right course for the company, the kind of company you're building? Why you made the decision, and what do you think about it?
Yeah, so we aspire to become a public company November 18, 2020. And we are already accountable to investors. The majority of our company is owned by investors, so we're already accountable. Now, private market investors, like venture capitalists, is different than public market investors. They tend to have different time horizons. But I think it's, first of all, it's a necessity. So in 2015, we had the choice whether we would take external capital. And I told my wife before I joined Y Combinator, please stop me if I want to take external capital, because the odds of success just go down from 90% to 10%. But what we also saw is that we were in a market competing, and if we wanted to win in that market, we needed the best people. And we tried to hire the best people, and they said, okay, well, how many stock options will I get? And we said, well, you're not going to get anything, because we're not aiming towards a liquidity event. They said, well, then I'm not interested. But in order to win, you need the best people. So, okay, you give them stock options. Now, I've also seen companies that they give out stock options, and then 15 years later, there's still no liquidity. That's not great as well. Like, if you give out stock options, people assume in 6-7 years it's worth something. So then we said, okay, now we get it. Apparently, to win, we have to raise money. and we have to get to a liquidity event. And there's two options. You can either get acquired or become a public company. Well, we rather keep our values and a lot of things intact. So we'd rather become a public company. Then me and Dimitri talked, like, what is our commitment? And Dimitri said, my commitment is for 10 years. I started GitLab in 2011. So my commitment is until 2021. And you can't leave like directly after the IPO. So we said, okay, we're going to IPO 1 year early in 2020. And then recently, our CFO asked, okay, 2020, like when exactly? I'm like, well, I don't know. And he said, well, let's do it as late as possible, giving us maximum time. We'll go out the week before Thanksgiving. And it was his son's birthday, November 16, 2020. And I merged it. And he was like, oh, that's a Monday. That's not a great day to go out. So let's change it to Wednesday. So, okay, well, I merged that. And then I went back to the Netherlands and I told my family. He said, that's so beautiful that you did that. I'm like, yeah, it's pretty cool that we're putting our aspiration out there, but what do you mean? Like, they seemed a bit overly excited about it and said, well, it would have been the 100th birthday of your grandfather. So that's pretty beautiful. My grandfather was also a chartered engineer with exactly the same name, so it would be a good celebration of his legacy.
Yeah, so sometimes things just keep falling in the right places, and you never know. So, yeah. I was talking to Jim Whitehurst, CEO of Red Hat, and I was like, what is the biggest challenge you face being a public company? He was like, when I acquire a company and I tell my investor that I'm going to open source it, and they were like, why? So you will be answered, because you have a totally different work culture. So you are totally prepared, to defend the company.
Yeah, and by the way, I have very much respect for how Red Hat did it each and every time, even if no one made them. So very cool to see how they did that. Yeah, there will be questions. There will be questions about remote work and all kinds of other things. But I think primarily people are investing for a return. So as long as we show good returns, as long as we do what we said we were going to do, it's fine. And if you don't, then you're going to be more accountable and there's going to be more pressure on the company.
So if you look at open source, the whole, depending on which community you're looking at, some communities are, you just throw the code at the wall after the release, or some communities are very open, especially which are like non-commercial, they work everything publicly. So what sets GitLab apart from those open source companies? Because what I saw here on the keynote, what people were very much, they said, we love GitLab because, so can you talk about that part of it?
Yeah, I think that compared to some other companies that came out of an open source project, we are more transparent. So we publish our roadmap, we publish all the issues we're going to do, and people are able to be on an equal playing field. Also because we don't have a headquarters, so we communicate, for example, through the public issue tracker. So people see the real work that's going on. It's not happening behind closed doors. And sometimes you have someone starting at GitLab and they say, I'm getting all this advice, but I can't find that team member on our page. And we're like, are you sure it's a team member? It might just be a user who's very interested in the work you're doing. So I think that level playing field where everything that can be open is open and everyone is on the same page, like there's not some hidden roadmap or hidden agenda. I think that's different than some other open core projects.
Right. Now let's switch the gear totally from people to pure technology part. What are the trends that you see in today's cloud native world that you are excited about and you see some evolution there?
Yeah. Well, first of all, we're all in on cloud native. Yesterday, we always do a challenge here at Contribute, and I said, look, the GitLab chart, the GitLab Helm chart has to support everything that we already supported in our Unix packages. So we see that as the future of cloud native. Or we see cloud native as our future. We'll be switching .com to it. That is where the world is going, and we want to make sure we're there. I had one of the Kubernetes founders say, like, hey, it seems that most people are using GitLab to deploy to Kubernetes. That's where we want to be. We want to make Kubernetes easier to use so that not everyone has to edit a Helm chart, but you can just push your code and GitLab takes care of the rest. So we're really excited about Kubernetes changing the world, changing infrastructure, and want people to use GitLab to get there.
And what is your opinion about I mean, when you look at cloud, mostly people talk about a stateless application, but stateful, you need a database, a lot of things which are persistent. What is your opinion about stateful applications on Kubernetes?
Yeah, it's a very interesting space. So right now, most people are using one of the kind of managed services from the public cloud for their stateful workloads, like RDS or Aurora for your database, for example. Now, I'm not sure how that's going to develop. On one hand, you have the projects to do that better. So you have Red Hat has operators, DCOS, Mesosphere has Kudo, a similar but competing framework. So they're trying to kind of automate the existing applications better. They commonly use like CRDs, custom resource definitions, to do that. On the other hand, you also have a project like Crossplane, which says, look, it's great, let those public clouds manage Kubernetes clusters and the database and everything else. Just make sure that you have kind of a CRD-like concept to manage all of that. So they have a primitive that allows you to just use all those services, but be cloud agnostic. It works both if you get a Redis cluster in Amazon or you get it on GCP. I think that's another very interesting development. And then the third development is, hey, maybe we have to re-engineer all these applications to become cloud native by themselves. So you have projects like CockroachDB that say, hey, we engineered the database from the ground up to be cloud native. So you're not going to have these stateful sets and these pets and all these other things. We're going to make it so that you can remove one of the servers and everything will still work. I'm not sure which approach is going to win. I'm very excited about Crossplanes because they're collaborating with us to make GitLab the first complex application on Crossplane. But we're also investing time to make a Red Hat operator for GitLab. And we're also looking at projects like CockroachDB as a maybe future replacement for GitLab. But it's all very early, so we're kind of watching from the sidelines and admiring all the great engineering that's being done.
So yesterday, GitHub, they announced, their package registry, and then GitLab responded, that you have been doing it for like 2012 or something like that. I don't remember the exact date. So, but what was real fascinating was that that there are a lot of things that that open source community, which is ahead of their curve and time. So, first of all, you can talk about that as well. What enables you to do that? Second is, what is really important to be there first, or to bring it to users more effectively? Can you talk about these, and how do you maintain the balance?
Yeah. So. We had the first part of packaging. In 2016, we added a container registry to GitLab. And the nice thing, it was based on open source code. It was based on code that Docker open sourced. So I'm proud that the GitLab community is innovating ahead of where commercial providers are. Open source sometimes is seen as something that is behind proprietary offerings. So we're very proud that with the wider community, we can sometimes be ahead. And for example, in the last release of GitLab, we have a monthly release, 195 changes were contributed by the wider community. So there's an enormous energy from outside the company to contribute new things to GitLab. And I think it's a very positive thing for end users. And in the end, it's all about bringing things in the hands of end users. Nobody cares who's first. Like AltaVista was the first search engine. Nobody cares. It's about, can you get it in the hands of users and can you make a great experience? That's the game, and we have some serious competition, and that's inspiring us to go faster.
I have heard like from 3 or 4 people, they are mentioning that you throw some CEO challenge at them. What is the idea behind it, and what do you achieve?
Yeah, so every year during the summit, we have a challenge, and the idea is to pick something that needs a bit of extra focus, that we're like, as a company, collectively, we're not paying enough attention. And the idea is, in the beginning of the summit, I announce a challenge. And if the challenge is achieved, and so far it's been achieved every single time, at the end, during the closing event, I do something on the silly side. So one time, I think that was our best one by far, I danced the Sid Shuffle from Ice Age 2. And this year, the challenge is around our chart. Our GitLab chart that you use to install GitLab on Kubernetes doesn't support everything that our omnibus packages do. So we want to make sure that our chart is the best version of GitLab, because GitLab.com is going to switch to that. Maybe in the future, even our Unix packages are going to use something like K3S to use that. So the chart should be the best version of GitLab, and that was the challenge, to have 3 more services that work well.
Right. You have a very unorthodox approach to business, like whether it's CEO challenge or the way. So if you look at or compare with the traditional businesses, what are the risks, or associated challenges associated with the kind of business you're building here, with all those so many different moving parts, remote working, open source, contribution based. So can you talk about that a bit?
Yeah, I've worked at some pretty large companies, and there's some dysfunctions you find kind of in every large company. And I'm very set on trying to prevent those dysfunctions from happening in GitLab. And yesterday was a great example. There was a person who said, yeah, at GitLab, we don't have any silos. It's so weird. And that was a great compliment, because we're functionally organized. I think functional organization is more efficient, and it allows you to have a boss that understands what you do, so you have a better manager. But the downside is that people get into their silos and don't communicate across silos. So many activities that we do are to prevent that, from group conversations to this event itself, to open Slack channels, to open issue trackers. And it's pretty cool if people kind of spontaneously say that it's working. So we're trying to prevent that. And as we scale bigger, we're going to do more and more things to try to prevent those dysfunctions from appearing.
So one example is silos. What are the other that you are really worried about, that, hey, this is what I don't want in my company?
Yeah, for example, one thing we discussed, we're going to add KPIs to every single job family. So every person at GitLab has a clearly described job family, what's expected of you. But I think we can make it more explicit. These are the 2 or 3 things that matter for your role. This is if you do this well, you're doing great. If you don't do this well, you're not doing great. I think that's very important, and I think it's interesting that I've never seen a company do that before. And as we get bigger, it's harder for people coming in to answer the question, what's expected of me? So we, as a company, we should do a great job there.
Right. And as you grow bigger, you also may have to either offer more or polish it. So sometimes it can be organic evolution of the product or service, and sometimes you may have to acquire something from outside. So what is your acquisition strategy look like?
Yeah. So GitLab is a single application for the entire DevOps lifecycle. And that means we cannot acquire another company and say, hey, we have another product. We have a single product, a single application. What we can do is acquire a company that has a team that's really good at what they do. So we have an acquisition offer page. So if you're a company that's built something that is on a roadmap, is something we aspire to ship in the future, we can acquire you. We will not take your product, but we will take that team that built it before, and then you do it once more in GitLab. And so far, that's been a great success, where, for example, we acquired Gymnasium. They came in and they rebuilt Gymnasium inside GitLab, and then they did 3 more things. They went from dependency scanning to container scanning to static code analysis to dynamic code analysis, all within like a year. So that's what we want. We want a team that's done it before. And we're pretty frugal, so we'll offer up to $1 million. But you don't need any customers, you don't need anything else. You need to have built a great product that didn't get distribution, and then you want the chance to spread that to more than 100,000 organizations using GitLab.
So before we wrap this interview, I'm just curious, that you're building the amazing company, building an amazing community. You work from home yourself. So do you get any free time to explore your hobbies? And if you do get, what are those?
Yeah, so I stop working every day around 6 o'clock. Frequently have an external dinner, so sometimes with friends, sometimes with people that are friends, but also work in the same industry, so more business related. Try to bring my wife in for those. And then in the weekends, we try to go out of the city. So I'm pretty protective of my weekends. In the winters, we go skiing. In the summer, we go to Napa or someplace nice. So I try to find a good balance. Like, I have to give the example as a CEO, and also I'm not made to work 70 hours a week.
Awesome. And the GitLab logo, is it cat?
It's interesting. Our first logo was some people said it was a fox and some people said it was a raccoon. And it kind of had elements of both. And then we found that in Japan, they have a type of animal called a raccoon dog. And it's called a tanuki. So our logo is a tanuki.
Oh, that's very key. I was thinking that you're a cat lover, so that you get, and that's why I was loving GitLab even more. But now I know a raccoon. Actually, where we live in Fredericton, we have a raccoon community because we have so many raccoons there. So I'm sure that my community will love this interview too. So once again, Sid, thanks for talking to me. And actually, now I look forward to talk more. So I look forward to talk to you again. Thank you.
Me too. Thank you.